Now, what is life like for young Asians living here in the UK?
A poet's job is to articulate it in ways that really put a mirror up to ourselves.
Hey, I'm Azaz. You can't see anything here. I'm a fresher. Some of you know me by the name of Spades. First time doing open mic, and got a sensitive story for you also. Here goes. Life doesn't always turn out how you expect it to. Imagine being born into a scenic view set out before you. The sun shining onto emerald grass of the country's endless valleys, and birds flying high as faraway trees just to feed their babies. As Michael looked into the distance and accommodated his focus, he saw this bigger picture. His obsession to care for others and ensure their happiness was initialized, but the world could only progress if this nature was not criticized. He didn't understand his parents dying in a car accident soon after his birth. He didn't understand being taken to the city and away from his earth. He didn't understand growing up as a kid in foster homes and parents sexually abusing him in one of those homes. All he understood was that he had to make them happy. Fast forward to high school. A girl called Jasmine had met our teenage Michael. She was as beautiful as they could be. A modern day Aphrodite, for those of you who know Greek mythology. He helped her out in any way he could, from homework to police. You could say that he was in love with her. But favours were required for the latter. In Michael's eyes, that didn't really matter. But before you know it, Michael trapped himself in a gang, kicked out of college, picked up the slang. He had a talent for pickpocketing, but then they wanted to pick up his rank. After roughing up this one dealer, they handed little Mike's to Shank. Go on, cuz. Tell him what I want. But hurting another is something Michael can't. Nah. You do your job and I'll do mine. Now get the fuck out of the way so I can get on with my grind. Fast forward to saving up enough money and getting out of the game. Hood up, head down, one earphone in, one earphone out. Managed to get a mundane desk job with a few qualifications he got. His mind numb from the life of crime he put behind, yet numb until the office's closing time. Michael's days ending the same way they started. Clickbait articles about how Kardashian farted. And soon would be the day that Michael stumbled upon internet porn. Watching men give pleasure to women in a way he didn't, evoked a desire to say to himself one early morn, I want to do this. I want to please others like this. Who knew that prostitution would be the career path Michael then chose to live? Earning enough to survive, but selling his body to pleasure women was always more important in his eyes. Months went by and the warmth he thought he could provide was always consumed by the growing cold his heart couldn't disguise. Seeing to this one client in a warehouse full of addicts, looking around him before he reached her climaxes, women and children throwing their lives away with whatever they poison themselves with each day, seeing an overdosed woman all marked and feeble with a baby in her arms screaming, Mama, please, give me more attention than you do with the needle. Lost in the world that he brought himself up in, Michael got dressed and ran out, overwhelmed from within. Tears streaming down his face, he found himself on the Tower Bridge nearby. One step forward into the River Thames and Michael would die. Shouting and contemplating everything up until that point, what were the chances that his mind would clear at the sound of a voice pleading for him to get down from there, but from behind him? Could it really have been the girl he once knew as Jasmine? Michael still couldn't answer, crying deeper and deeper into his abyss. The voice asked, why are you doing this? With Michael being able to say, looking up to the night sky, because I'm a bird, and all I wanted to do is just fly. Life doesn't always turn out how you expect it to. There are so many journeys people have taken in this world, that we don't know about, and so many endings to those journeys that we will never ever understand or know the reason for. The reality is, at least 140,000 people in England each year go to hospital having committed suicide, having attempted suicide, with more than 4,000 people ending their life each year committing suicide. If you know about someone in need, even if they're not a loved one, show them some compassion and kindness, because who knows, the care that you give them might be the care that they've always needed deep down, and it might be the care that will end up saving their life. Thank you.
In my first year of university, I performed a semi-autobiographical piece called Life, the first ever spoken word I've ever done, and it was going to be my last. But here I am now, in my third and final year here, and I've decided to be personal, honest, and true to myself and true to you. Because the reality is that you can't have life without death. So here it goes. You're such a packy. Fuck off, you curry muncher. Go kill yourself, you terrorist. I've suffered from these slurs ever since I was a child from people who shock you as racist. But in the gorgeous city of London, you just got to learn to live with it. At first impressions, you can think I've had it easy, coming from ends portrayed as so multicultural. Nah. My hometown in South was just another concrete jungle. Growing up and playing football with kids from different postcode gangs, picking up my Ace of Spades nickname tag and learning the underground rhythms and pre-mainstream grime instrumental tracks, but learning to say no whenever they'd ask me to join, offer me a spliff or hand me their shank. Always had to play it smart, make the right friends and speak the right words, just so I wouldn't fall victim to my childhood fear of having my lifestyle being stabbed apart. Playing it smart, I worked my way into another town's grammar school, and I was introduced to a lifestyle which was completely alien to what I was used to. Being taught how to speak proper, what to address elders and when to dress appropriate. Taught myself how to add these manners in my character bank instead of replacing everything I knew before like slang that would be easier to say and rhyme. Just so I can adapt to any environment, an easy switch between an urban street kid and a gentleman at the same time. Like using what I learned from ends for having my first kiss and catching my first wine. Like using what I learned from school for my TV show that got Sky Sports airtime. But that didn't mean it was an easy ride and the world would get any less fucked up. Kids were killing kids left, right and centre. I'd see posts and videos online of peeps being bullied by their tormentor. Since my generation of youth had adopted social media, I remember receiving the BBM broadcast during the UK riots detailing more hits on another shopping centre. And throughout all those battles happening externally, I was battling my own demons internally. Developed an anxiety disorder that left panic attacks feeling like a punch in the chest and a Muay Thai kick to the face. Self-esteem so low I had to mask my unhappiness and by making friends with everyone in school, sixth form, the whole place. I had to make them happy. I have to meet more people and make them smile. I have to hope that this will make me happy and make me smile. Managed to graft and charm my way out of the ends and into the best institute of the country. I got into Loughborough University. But before I made that next step, I had to experience the death of my good friend Jamal. My young G died on a swimming trip in Canada at 17 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. I was familiar with death my whole life, but that was the first time I cried. Why him? The most talented, him. The most contagious smile, him. The most popular role model, him. Him. Why him? I'll never forget the day when hundreds of us came back to school and cried for hours during those assemblies and speeches. I'm not beginning to imagine the pain of his family. For the whole day, I was just fucking speechless. Became agnostic because how could a god tear people to such pieces? But when we lit those sky lanterns for him and succeeded in getting his favourite rapper Drake to pay tribute, I realised the positive impact he had upon the whole world was a legacy I should try to continue. Continue to emulate his warm-hearted nature and make sure everyone is the best that they can be. That was the real reason why I came to this uni. I didn't come here to do a degree. Throughout my whole freshman year, every night out, I'd write out a new iPhone's notes list of all the names of people I'd meet and then add them on Facebook to catch up with them the next day. Made me realise that "are you out tonight?" is the most common phrase uni students will always say. I've been told my Instagram profile is colourful with friends from different cultures, communities and walks of life from all over. But the darkness is hinted at Now that I think back and look closer, I floated around different social circles for as long as I can remember, because this fear of being rejected is something I've had forever, since the emotional and verbal love my parents would lack towards me and never express, that an introverted kid like me should have self-esteem and not feel worth less, left me afraid and simply without any strength to get closer to any friend for more than an arm's length. I've met so many beautiful people and personalities from around the world since I started at Loughborough. With every hug, I'm able to share more of that love, bruh. I've even loved making friends with staff, security and campus cleaners. Busting calm conversation with this black caretaker one day, I remember a group of white boys and girls had seen us. Why has he stopped to talk to that monkey? You'll never know how much hearing that whisper hurt in a supposedly progressive yet predominantly white uni. I guess no matter how hard you try to show love, you can never get away from the general ignorance that is racism. And I could never get away from death. Before I knew it, I see Grenfell Tower going down with people I know becoming missing, and terrorist attacks and tragedy striking the world all over. Before I knew it, I got addicted to alcohol, drinking it day and night until I get paralysed. Before I knew it, I lost myself between the legs of a girl and froze, walked out and realised the temporary pleasure from all the sex and booze I was having couldn't trump the pain. Then the recent summer of 17 happened, which sure as hell drove me insane. One of my oldest friends from primary school called me up and said, "Hey bro, I think our friend Celine is dead." He told me she was raped and murdered and all I could do was cry. She was taken from this world, her family and her friends at 19 years old, and like with Jamal, I couldn't even say goodbye. Locked myself in my room and attempted to commit suicide for the first time. Didn't want to live in a world that week where I googled her name every day in the wait for that dreaded news headline. Avoided my family, and to everyone I became a recluse. I had 3,000 friends on Facebook, but still felt like I had no one to turn to. And then all of a sudden, all at once, all over, I see it. Young Muslim Celine Dukran kidnapped, raped, and had throats slit in honour killing. Plastered everywhere in all national newspapers. Man, I struggled to process. And how the honour killing bit was bullshit. Like, how fucked up is the press? Yeah, and how people usually blame Islam, the religion of peace, for everything and everyone wrong in the world. Even when innocent Muslims like Celine are the ones being killed and persecuted by extremists all over the world. I usually don't, but I started to get paranoid of people who had nothing better to do than spread negativity, rumours and backbiting. When there's so much more to life, there's so much more life to that than judging others and the hate beef that they've been inciting. Then I just cried. Why her? The friend who texted me and pinged me jokes until we could laugh no longer. Her. The friend I'd see every Chandra celebration night before Eid. Her. The friend who'd always tried to make me smile no matter what. Her. Her. Why her? Tears streaming down my face as I left my house and skateboarded into cars during rush hour. I felt suicidal as I tried to burn myself in one shower. I remember what stopped me there was looking down at my chest and reminding myself of who I am by my name, or my tags are always around my neck. I'm someone who's needed for so many extracurriculars I committed myself to. I had to distract my suicidal thoughts and continue making others happy, so I needed to pull through. Leading my regret family of a hall into the single final was something I could only dream of since I was a fresher. Honestly, was the best 2 minutes of my life, even with all that pressure. But then it ended up being one of the worst nights of my life as the depression crept back in and I had 4 panic attacks. After that, all I can remember is trying to drink myself to death and trying so hard to collapse. I was alive next morning, but why couldn't my pain just end? Even though I fundraised for charity, I then ran the world's first marathon in Greece with no training on purpose, just so I can maximise the pain, fall into the abyss and not resurface. But when I crossed that finish line, the agony and emptiness in my mind suddenly started to decline, because I looked around and realised thousands of others from around the planet who'd achieved that too had not yet died. Because temporarily we have pain, but forever we have pride. All my life I've deprived myself of pride in my own achievements, happiness from my own self and care for my own health. I've been seeking counselling and my antidepressants have started to assist me at my worst. Because you can't help other people if you can't help yourself first. I'm sorry to all the people in my life that I've hurt or negatively affected. Please know that I purely wanted to bring some light to your life as I've always intended. My mistakes don't define me. My flaws don't define me. My mental health don't define me, and my attempts to end it all don't define me. Ever since I was born, death has been my enemy. I got so used to that I started to love it like an ally. I'd wake up every other morning thinking about everyone I've lost and wondering for the next day that I'm going to die. But facing death for years has led me to the point where I'm done with embracing what it means to be dead. Now I finally embrace what it means to live instead. And honestly, I'm truly happy to say I'm blessed to be alive from now on, and especially today, on my 21st birthday. Thank you all so much for your kind birthday messages. I'll get around to replying to each and every one of you because your love and support means the absolute world to me, so I can't thank you enough. Even though we can't experience life without death, and that death inevitably happens in all of our lives, it's important for us all to remember that this does not mean we need to embrace it. Regardless of our race, religion, sexual orientation, creed, or identity, we are all human beings put on this earth to support ourselves and one another, love and prosper. Whenever we can, we should always try to embrace life instead and make the most of it for everyone, including ourselves, while we can. Because life is too short for anything else. Thank you for watching and listening.
Now, what is life like for young Asians living here in the UK? We spoke to 4 young East and South Asians who also happen to be budding poets to find out more about their lives in their own words.
At first impressions, you could think I've had it easy, coming from ends portrayed as so multicultural. Nah, my hometown in South was just another concrete jungle. Always had to play it smart, make the right friends and speak the right words, just so I wouldn't fall victim to the childhood fear of my life being stabbed apart.
This is for the third world kids, the ones that waltz into this world with suitcases, the ones with more stamps on their passport than fingers or toes, the ones whose heart will always be in a three-way tie between places, the ones who learned early to pack all your memories, clothes and goodbyes into 23 kilograms in cabin baggage.
Our votes never made it to the ballot boxes. Instead, they were cast at home, more specifically in the kitchen, because that's where our nannies and ammis and bibis found that their electorate paid the most attention. Rotis and rice became the currency of power, while empty thalis meant a landslide victory.
Hoi, kamusta? Have you eaten yet? Grandma would notice again that I've starved myself for about a decade, so a plateful of rice will come my way to eat with pinakbet. Cold winters. I crave for a hot bowl of greasy ramen in a boxed claustrophobic room where waiters yell at me, "Irashaimase."
Yes, we've moved out of the kitchens and into the boardrooms, the operating theatres, the publishing houses. So you'd think that some things would have changed. But our hatred for each other because of our hatred of ourselves meant that everything stayed just the same.
But now that I graduated with this degree, I'm back at home with my Pakistani family. And I feel like I can't do for my family what I did for my friends. Because there's so much I want to share about how mentally ill my life became, knowing that speaking aloud relieves burdens and can empower my relatives to do the same. But my culture doesn't do that. It's still like how it was for my dad, growing up in Karachi, and no one ever talking about their feelings. Built up to the point where my westernized expectations can't take it any longer after always hitting the ceiling. I've experienced firsthand the kind of death, addiction and keep quiet attitude my Asian generation are taught not to express, especially through these kinds of lyrics.
Please give a big round of applause to this first poet coming up. I asked people for an interesting fact about themselves, and he said that he was listening to an artist called Joe G. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but it obviously means something to this gentleman who's about to come up. Please give a big round of applause to Aiz Hussain. Whoosh.
Hello? Hello? Oh wow, that's loud. Okay, cool. Hi, my name's Aiz. Oh wow, that is loud. So This poem's quite a personal one. First time I'm performing it live, so just wanted to get off my chest, so here it goes. Oh, wow, there's people there as well. You're such a packy. Off, you curry muncher. Go kill yourself, you terrorist. I've suffered from these slurs ever since I was a child from people who'd shock you as racist. But in this gorgeous city of London, you've just got to learn to live with it. At first impressions, you could think I've had it easy, coming from ends portrayed as so multicultural. My hometown in the south was just another concrete jungle. Growing up and playing football with kids from different postcode gangs, picking up my Aces Phase nickname tag and learning the underground rhythms and pre-mainstream grime instrumental tracks, but learning when to say no whenever they'd ask me to join, offer me a spliff or hand me their shank. Always had to play it smart, make the right friends and speak the right words, just so I wouldn't fall victim to the childhood fear of my life being stabbed apart. Playing it smart, I worked my way into another town's grammar school, and I was introduced to a lifestyle which was completely alien to what I was used to. Being taught how to speak proper, what to address elders, and when to dress appropriate. Taught myself how to add these manners in my character bank instead of replacing everything I knew before, like slang that would be easier to say and rhyme. Just so I could adapt to any environment and easily switch between an urban street kid and a gentleman at the same time. Like using what I learned from ends for having my first kiss and catching my first wine. Like using what I learned from school for my TV show that got Sky Sports airtime. But that didn't mean it was an easy ride and the world would get any less fucked up. Kids were killing kids left, right, and center. I'd see posts and videos online of peeps being bullied by their tormentor. And since my generation of youth had adopted social media, I remember receiving the BBM broadcast during the UK riots detailing more hits on another shopping centre. And throughout all those battles happening externally, I was battling my own demons internally. Developed an anxiety disorder that left panic attacks feeling like a punch in the chase and a Mai Tai kick to the face. Self-esteem so low I had to mask my unhappiness by making friends with everyone in school, sixth form, the whole place. Managed to graft and charm my way out of the ends and into the best institute of the country. I got into Loughborough University. But before I made the next step, I had to experience the death of my good friend Jamal. My young G died on a swimming trip in Canada at 17 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. I was familiar with death my whole life, but that was the first time I cried. Why him? The most talented, him. The most contagious smile, him. The most popular role model, him. Why him? I'll never forget the day when hundreds of us came back to school and cried for hours during those assemblies and speeches, not even beginning to imagine the pain of his family. For the whole day, I was just fucking speechless. Became agnostic because how could a God tear people to such pieces? But when we lit those sky lanterns and succeeded in getting his favorite rapper Drake to pay tribute, I realized the positive impact he had upon the whole world was a legacy I should try to continue to emulate his warm-hearted nature and make sure that everyone was the best that they could be. That was the real reason why I went to that uni. I didn't go there to do a degree. Now that I've graduated with this degree, I'm back at home with my Pakistani family. But I feel like I can't do for my family what I did for my friends, because there's so much I want to share about how mentally ill my life became, knowing that speaking aloud relieves burdens and can empower my relatives to do the same. My culture doesn't do that shit. It's just like how it was for my dad growing up in Karachi and no one ever talking about their feelings. Built up to the point where my westernized expectations can't take it any longer after always hitting the ceiling. No more. Do you know what it's like waking up feeling like you can't breathe every day? No more. Do you know what it's like to overthink your minority's worth as you lie in bed at night? No more. Do you know what it's like having survivor's guilt from your friends who've died, been raped, murdered, and committed suicide? No more. I can't do this anymore. I can't. I've experienced firsthand the kind of death, addiction, and keep quiet attitude my Asian generation are taught never to express, especially through these kinds of lyrics. So now it's time to scrap that lack of communication and just raise the next generation in way higher spirits. Open the lid of that bottled up negativity we feel by just talking about it whenever we want to. Pour pouring away the stigma so we can drink self-love and love each other too. Even with this life of mine so far, that will always be my fucking worldview. Because I hope that those of you listening will try to do the same in the future. So for that, I thank you.
Big round of applause for Ez. Wow. Okay, I'm going to go to Nikita. Just give us, one comment that you feel, either advice or opinion or just something.
That was really lyrical and beautifully crafted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Az Hussain.
It is 12 minutes past 12, and a very good afternoon to you. Okay, now, poetry. It's a beautiful thing. It's an essential thing. Something I've learned over the last couple of years is how vital poetry is. And I know that sounds so weird and kind of hippie-ish, but as someone that grew up with rap music and understanding what that said to me, but then to understand how a poet manages to expose our feelings in a way that we ourselves can't articulate. It's often very hard for us, isn't it, to tell someone how we are feeling in more than just a couple of words. I'm sad, I'm happy, I feel down, I feel up, smiling, crying. But a poet's job is to articulate it in ways that really put a mirror up to ourselves, not just personally, but societally. There's emotions, there's politics, there's the world around us, there's the world within us. Well, Az Hussain is with us, and Orin Begum. They are both poets and spoken word artists, and it's a great pleasure to have you both on the show. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Orin, if I could start with you, why did you become a poet?
I don't think I decided to become a poet. I think I used poetry as a way to, it was a way of therapy for me, I think. I started writing in my final year of uni when I was very stressed, and I went to uni where there weren't a lot of people who look like me there. You know, I'm a South Asian Muslim woman, and my university was dominated by white middle class men. And it was my way of dealing with all the issues that come from that, you know, being different, being other, and all the preconceptions people might have, or the fact that people have never met a brown person before. Like, that baffled me. So I used it as a way of dealing with those issues.
But why poetry? I mean, you say that, you know, it's kind of therapy, but there are therapists for therapy, right?
Yeah.
So what is it about poetry that soothes your soul or your mind?
I mean, I've always been an avid reader of poetry. I've always enjoyed, you know, the classics as well as spoken word poetry online as well. I think because having watched a lot of spoken word artists online, I think that spoke to me. I think, you know, what you said about their job being to articulate the feelings that, normal people can't always put into words.
Well, that's my understanding. Tell me if I'm wrong, but that's fine.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because when I write my poetry, it's like, it is difficult. It's difficult to try and put those feelings into words. But when you do, and then people reach out to you and go, oh my God, that's exactly how I'm feeling. I just didn't know how to say it. So I think it's the beauty of poetry that, you know, it has that power to connect people, and, you know, it makes you feel like, you know what, I'm not by myself. Other people feel like this as well. So I think it's a very good kind of connecting factor between a lot of people from all different walks of life.
Azaz, what about you? Did you choose poetry, or did it choose you?
It's a big question. I think for me, I mean, I've never actually been familiar with poetry or spoken word poets before. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've always listened to music genres like grime, jazz, R&B, rap, and I think that form of expression, it carried on throughout my life. But I think it was a few years ago where there was a spoken word event at my university, and it someone prompted me to get up on stage and just express myself, and I think put a pen to the paper, and I think all those different influences came together and it just seemed like a right fit, and I've just been doing a couple of poems here and there. I don't really class myself as a spoken word poet, but it's important to get things off your chest and not let everything bottle up.
What do you class yourself as if you wish to be defined? Some people don't wish to be defined, but for sake of a pithy radio sentence, what would you consider yourself to be?
I like to consider myself an artist. I think we all are artists in one form or another. It's just a way of expressing ourselves, and whatever outlet we find comfortable with, I think that's good, and we should pursue that. And I feel as though spoken word poetry for me is my outlet.
What are the themes that you keep returning to as that perhaps you subconsciously you are drawn towards?
Personally, and I could be really honest, it's probably life and death. In my life, I've experienced a lot of my friends who've died, committed suicide, been raped, stabbed. It's a lot to take in, and obviously you've got to constantly have a positive outlook on life, and I think that for me it's a big theme in my life, because that just makes me realise that life is so short and you need to embrace it while you can. Bar all the other mental health and all the other cultural factors that bear into that, I think it is important to constantly highlight the positives of life, and I think that's what I try to do, even with negative undertones. There is a positive message there.
And for you, Warren?
I think my kind of themes that I constantly come back to are the themes of identity and feeling both out of place in a foreign place as well as out of place in your own community. And I think in terms of my own community, issues like colorism, body shaming, lack of awareness or understanding of mental health, those kind of issues that, you're amongst your own people, you're meant to feel safe, you're meant to feel comfortable and accepted, but you don't. And I think those kind of issues to do with identity, those are my running themes throughout a lot of my poetry.
And how as a listener do we have to treat what you're saying, in the sense that do we need a new vocabulary to understand what you're saying, or have you as the poet or spoken word artist, have you failed if we do need that?
I think that's the thing about poetry. It's so subjective. It's like I could write a poem about one thing in my mind and use completely normal language that everybody would understand, but somebody else might take away something completely different from it. And I think that's fine. I think that's the beauty of poetry, that you interpret it in your own light, in your, in the context of your own life. And I don't think, whether the poet writes something with an intention of, yes, this is about this, whatever the reader takes away or the listener takes away, that's on them. And I think as long as it helps them in some way, I'm happy with what I've done, I think.
Isaac?
It's
the
an interesting
language
one.
of poetry.
Yeah. I think it's very individualistic. It's important for the person who's delivering the language for them to feel comfortable with what they're doing, that it shouldn't ever be a matter of them saying words just to fit in with cultural norms and societal norms. It's very much personal, and if it is honest, and if it is if it does show empathy and care and actual passion, then I think it will resonate with a wider audience, regardless of if you know what kind of language they're using.
Ultimately, is a poet's work for themselves? Is it created for you?
Personally, I look at it two ways. The first way, I do it for my own personal gain, because I consider myself quite a selfless person, but then if I think about it, we all need to be selfish every now and then, because if we don't, it will just eat us up inside, and you can't help other people if you can't help yourself first. But on the other hand, I do it just to spread a positive message and just try and, you know, empower and encourage other people to be the best person that they can be and show empathy and show love and show care towards others, because the way that this world is going right now, it's not, you know, it needs to be better. We need to be better, and hopefully we can teach the next generation to, you know, be better.
Yes, that would be the prize, because looking at, say, for instance, as something like the violence that we're currently seeing on the streets of not just London but other cities in the UK, what can poetry, for instance, say about that? What can poetry do to help heal?
I think with the right positive message and the right, you know, sense of understanding. I mean, there's so many people that can pick up a pen and write down whatever they're feeling and not think of the consequences, and, you know, just use damaging words. And I don't think people will resonate with that. I think you have a responsibility as soon as you perform something to a wider audience that you need to think very hard about the kind of people if you're trying to persuade people to lower their violence, or if you're trying to persuade people to look at different methods of, you know, expressing themselves. I think it is important to just remember that people are listening, and if you want to tackle, you know, the high rising violence in London and around the UK, then you need to start thinking about, you know, you just need to start thinking in a more positive outlook. It's important. I think there's too much negativity, and positivity would be key.
Ah, indeed. Oren, your thoughts on that?
In terms of, I think, what role poetry has to play in, you know, the wider context of the violence that we're seeing these days, I think poetry has a special place in the sense that I feel like it can dig down to the root and the crux of where this violence or this rage or this, you know, all this anger is coming from. I think, yes, we see the violence and, you know, the stabbings and the shootings on the news, but why? Why is that happening? And I think when I've heard poetry from, you know, ex-gang members or people who've been in prison, they've so beautifully managed to get down to the crux of why they did what they did, the situations that they were in, their friends were in, their families were in, the situation society at large had put them in. I think poetry is a very great way for people like that to express themselves, and I think, you know, normally when people like that want to, you know, justify or just explain their side of the story, a lot of people aren't willing to listen because, you know, you've stabbed someone, you know, or you've committed this crime or that crime, and nobody's actually willing to listen as to what their story is. And I think poetry from those people, I think when I've heard it, it's just been so moving and so eye-opening. Like, man, I would never have thought of that kind of thing. So I think if we can use poetry to help those people express themselves and see why they're doing what they're doing, I think that would be a really, really good thing.
But how difficult is it, I guess, as to make people understand or accept that poetry can help them?
Well, I think the first step is always obviously acceptance and knowing that, like, even if they think that they're not in the wrong, I think it is important to look at something like poetry as an outlet, and just because there's a stigma around it. I mean, even for me, like, ever since I was a kid, I never classed myself as a poet. I never look at poetry and think, oh yeah, that would be a good way of getting my feelings out. But then, you know, as you get older, you find natural things like poetry. I mean, poetry's all around us. You look at newspapers, you look at adverts, you watch films. It's all expression, and I think it's such an easy way to get your thoughts and your feelings across, and it just flows. And I think if more people were to realise that, then they could take up. They may not even want to take up poetry. They might take up other forms of outlets. But I think any form of outlet, in a positive sense, is a very good thing, and it shows a lot of optimism for the future.
And it is an outlet, isn't it? Is it being recognised, do you think, poetry as a way of dealing with people who have complex issues from a kind of, I guess, governmental or local government or amongst health professionals even?
The only example I can think of is, I think, the dentist who does those raps on Instagram.
Okay, that's definitely right. Okay.
Yeah, that's the only thing that springs to mind. I think.
Well, that answers that question.
Yeah, if the government were to look into to forms of expression such as spoken word poetry, and especially put funding it towards these types of outlets for young kids especially, I think that would be very, very beneficial. And I think especially for the South Asian culture, or just Asian culture in general, for people to realise that, we do want our voices to be heard. It's so important.
Well, listen, we have run out of time. Azaz is saying thank you, and Oreen Begum, thank you as well for joining us today.